Okay, so part two was slightly cut short there, but we saw Tony Blair at the end. We can see from that video for Labour how the Sheffield rally was picked up by the media. The bit where Neil Kinnock shouts, "We're all right," several times. He doesn't look very prime ministerial. And that all fed into this greater argument about, can you trust Labour? Now, one of the big issues then and today is that most of the print media, newspapers, were very one sided. Most of them were very much in favour of the Conservatives. Only really the Independent and the Guardian and the Mirror are kind of Labour or less Conservative supporting in terms of the Independent. Most of the newspapers are very heavily Conservative. Now, what you saw was lots of press were very much against Neil Kinnock. And in fact, on this slide here, which is on the thing you need to read, you can see The Sun, which is the largest newspaper, in terms of readership, the day before the election, or the day of the election, they had the headline, "If Kinnock wins today, can the last person in Britain please turn out the lights?" And then the next day, when Kinnock had lost and the Conservatives had won, they rejoiced and said it was The Sun what won it. In terms of whether Labour were going to win this election, these were the opinion polls that were done between 1987 and 1992. Now, Mrs Thatcher fell in November 1990, and you can see then that Labour were 43 and Conservatives 32, so there's a Labour lead. But you saw that by 1991, that lead had disappeared, and the Conservatives and Labour were basically neck and neck. So actually, it wasn't like there was going to be a clear Labour win in those few years before the election. It was actually much closer. In terms of the impact of the election campaign itself, these were the average of the opinion polls during the election campaign itself. And you can see in the, got the weeks below, so in the 5 weeks before the election, pretty neck and neck, Labour, Conservative within 1% or 2. There's always a few percent of error in these opinion polls, but in this last week is when you see the change take place. Now, was that due to the Sheffield rally, which was in this last week? Was it because the Conservative message about tax and about Labour can't be trusted are kind of hit through by that last week? We'll never really know, will we? But you can definitely see that the Conservatives had the upper hand by that final week and therefore that final victory. A lot of stuff was done at the time about the opinion polls being wrong, because everyone thought that Labour might just about win or have some kind of coalition with the Liberals, and then obviously there was a much clearer Conservative victory. So again, there were lots of stuff done about opinion polls can't be trusted, opinion polls are wrong. Again, things you hear today, because obviously there's been a few elections of late where the opinion polls have not been 100% accurate. Okay, so finally, and again, you're going to be using these sheets, in terms of the outcome, the Conservatives actually lost 41 seats in this election. The Labour Party gained 42. In terms of percentage of the votes, though, the Conservatives got 41. They only lost 0.3%, and Labour gained 3.6%. It shows how first past the post actually benefited Labour over the Conservatives. Ironic, considering the Conservatives were campaigning so hard in this election to maintain first past the post and warning that Labour would change the system if they ever saw power. In terms of class voting and stuff, again, you've got these, looking more detail. There's very little change. Okay, I know it's not 100% clear on here, but actually, very little change in 1992 compared to the previous election. So your middle class vote was 54% for the Conservatives, which is exactly what it was for Mrs Thatcher in the previous election. Labour gained from 18 to 22% of the middle class votes. They went up by 4%. A small increase, not massive. In terms of our C2s, who I've said before are kind of the kingmakers of British politics, the Conservatives basically got, I think they were 1% down than what they were in 1987. Labour, I think they're 1% up than what they were. So again, not really a huge amount of change. And the same was true for the working class vote again. So this election saw very little change in the classes and how they voted. Very little change in terms of gender or age. And in many ways, it kind of confirmed that Conservative coalition of supporters which they gained under Mrs Thatcher in 1979. And the question for Labour as a consequence was, could they ever achieve power again? Was the country becoming a bit too middle class? What would they need to do to win a future general election? So, as an overview, 1992 election, very little change in terms of social class voting or all those sorts of efforts. It was a closer election in terms of the outcome. Labour did pick up a number of seats. Now, the question arises, did Labour lose because of Neil Kinnock and the party leadership? Did they lose because of the Conservative campaign and how they were successfully attacking them on tax and spend and memories of 1979? Did Labour lose because the country was becoming a bit too middle class and Labour hadn't made enough changes to their agenda? Did Labour lose because of the media and the media portrayals? These are all things you'll need to think about and grapple with, because you need to be able to compare this election to 1997 and then obviously other elections pre and post 1997. So plenty of food for thought there, and I will do another video next which will be on the 1997 election.